Hey there students, back at it again with a very special video. This time I'm going to teach you how the quadratic formula actually works and show you that it's not just some random equation. Let's get started. Hey there students. So what you've basically learned in class is if you have a quadratic function in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, a quadratic equation in this form here, you've been taught that if you cannot solve this equation via factoring, you have one more option you can use, and that's using the quadratic formula. Here's a quadratic formula right here. It basically states that as long as you know what your values of a, b, and c are, you can just shove them into here, and then you'll be good to go and you'll solve your quadratic. However, I think it's a horrible idea to just give you this equation without telling you why it actually works. Because by the end of your grade 10 math course, you actually have all the skills basically necessary to derive the quadratic formula yourself. And I think it's very important that we do that here in this lesson this afternoon here. So I'm going to write down that standard form of a quadratic equation again. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna actually somehow get x by itself. So with all the skills you learned up to this point, there's no way for me here to get x by itself, because I can't get all the x terms to one side and all the constant terms to the other side, because x has both a power of 1 form here and a power of 2 form here. So there's really no way for me to get this x by itself completely. However, we have learned some skills that might allow us to actually do that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use that concept of completing the square in order for me to get from here all the way to here. And it's going to be a little bit tricky, but you'll see that the quadratic formula doesn't come out of nowhere. It actually is derived properly using correct algebra techniques. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start by moving that value of c to the other side. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I want to now basically complete the square with what I have here, because I know that if I have a quadratic in a standard form like this, if I complete the square with it, I can change it into a vertex form. That looks something along the lines of this. And then from there, since this x no longer has a squared version of it and a non-squared version of it, from here, because x is just kind of standing alone on its own, I can probably solve for x from this situation here. So that's going to be my goal today. I'm going to use completing the square to take myself from an equation that has both a squared version and just a regular version of x and give it just a regular version of x. So what I'm going to do now is, in order for me to complete the square, I can't have a coefficient in front of my x squared term. So I'm going to factor it out. I'm going to factor out that a, which will leave me with x squared. And then I just need to remember that if I factor an a out of bx, I got to put a over that term. And here we go. All right, now I'm going to complete the square with the binomial that I have in here. So I know that that new c value has to be equal to half of my b value all squared. So in this case here, my b value is technically b over a. So I know that c is going to equal b over a divided by 2, which is just the same thing as me putting a 2 on the bottom here, all squared. And that's going to get me to square a fraction. I simply square the top. So b squared is b squared. And then I need to square the bottom as well. So 2 squared is 4. And a squared is a squared, obviously. All right. So then from here, we were taught in order to complete the square. Hang on, guys. It looks a little messy. Nice. We were taught to add that c value into the bracket. And then after that, we were taught to take the coefficient that's outside of that bracket and multiply it by the negative of that c term that we just found. And then here I got a minus c on the right side of this equal sign still. Okay. So now I'm just going to simplify things down a little bit more. So I got my a here. Lucky for us, what completing the square does is it forces this binomial into thinking it's a perfect square trinomial. So I just want to now quickly factor this perfect square trinomial, and all I got to do in order to do that is square root the first term. So the square root of x squared would be x. Then I just need to drag down the sign of the second term, which would be this plus sign here, followed by the square root of the last term. So the square root of this last term is the square root of b squared is just b, and then the square root of 4a squared is just 2a. And then we were taught I can now put a squared on top of this bracket here. So by completing the square, we're kind of getting further along. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just simplify this. So because I'm multiplying an a by a 4a squared on the bottom, that a will cancel out, and that squared will cancel out. A plus times a minus is a minus sign, and I am left with this right here. Okay, equals negative c. Now we can keep solving. So, as you can see as well, there's no more x squared and an x term. Sorry, I forgot to put the x there. That happens. I'm just left with an x term now. So, I'm going to keep solving for this equation now. What I can do is I can move this a negative b squared over 4a onto the other side. And that's going to get me b squared over 4a minus c. What I can now do is I can divide both sides by a over here. That means I need to divide this side by this guy by a and that guy by a as well. So those will cancel out. And then what I'm going to have is I'm going to have x plus b over 2a all squared is equal to b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. All right. Now what I want to do before I go further is I want to simplify these two fractions here by subtracting them. So here the common denominator between these two fractions is 4a squared. So that means that I need to take this fraction and multiply both the top and the bottom by 4a. Sorry, not 4ac. 4a squared. There we go. Yeah, because the bottom of this fraction is missing both a 4 and one of the a's. So continuing that up here, I have that x plus b over 2a all squared is equal to b squared minus, look at this, 4ac. Oh my god, guys, that's starting to look kind of familiar. All over 4a squared. All right, now I just got to keep solving for x. So the next thing I would do from here is I would square root both sides. Doing that will leave me with x plus b over 2a, and that's going to equal, I just got to remember that when I'm square rooting and solving, I need to plus minus the other side. So if I do a plus minus here, the top will just be b squared minus 4ac. And then the bottom, if I square root that, will just be 2a. We are getting really, really close now, as we can see. All I got to do now is just move this b over 2a term to the other side. And that's going to get me negative b over 2a. And because I have a 2a on this fraction and this fraction, I can just combine the tops and leave the bottoms the same because they do have a common denominator already. And look at that. There is the quadratic formula. It didn't just pop out of thin air. It's not just some guess and check type of the method that somehow worked out for everybody. It actually can be derived using algebra skills that you have learned in your grade 10 math course. And some teachers like for you to derive the quadratic formula as a thinking question on your math test. I've seen that happen sometimes. So just good to know that this equation here doesn't come out of nowhere. We can actually get to it ourselves using algebra skills that we've already learned. Amazing.
Well, there you have it, students. I hope you now see that everything you learn in math doesn't just come out of nowhere, and that's what makes math so cool. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, drop a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. If there are any other concepts you want a better understanding of, leave a comment below, and it could be that concept that I cover in the next video. And remember, students, whether you're struggling in school or are just trying to get ahead of the curve, we have tons of amazing options available. Book a session with us now. Till next time, take it easy.